The dog had returned to base alone, but everything in his eyes said someone else had not. Dawn had barely reached the eastern hills when Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer noticed the movement beyond the secondary gate. At first, it looked like a shadow crossing the service road. Then the shape stepped into the pale security lights, and Daniel saw the black and tan coat, the lowered head, and the uneven rhythm of 4 tired legs. The German Shepherd was moving toward the base one careful step at a time, barely placing weight on his front right paw. Dust covered his harness. Mud had dried along his chest. His amber eyes never left Daniel. The morning air smelled of damp concrete, diesel fuel, and the cold metal of the perimeter fence. Somewhere behind the maintenance buildings, a generator started with a low mechanical hum. Daniel set down the inspection clipboard and walked toward the gate. "Easy, Ranger." The dog's ears lifted at his name. Daniel knew him from the training yard. 6 years old. Search-trained. Disciplined. Usually no more than a few feet from Corporal Owen Blake, his handler. Owen was not with him now. Ranger passed through the open pedestrian gate without waiting for a command. He did not move toward the kennels. He did not look for water. He came directly to Daniel and stopped close enough that his breath touched the Marine's boots. Something was clenched between his teeth. "What do you have?" Daniel lowered himself slowly. Ranger opened his mouth. A rectangular training patch fell onto the concrete with a soft, wet sound. It was coated in gray mud, steel dust, and a dark red stain that had dried along one edge. Daniel recognized the faded insignia immediately. It belonged to Owen's training vest. Ranger looked down at the patch, then turned his head toward the western hills beyond the base. He waited. Daniel reached for the radio clipped to his belt. "Gate 2 to operations. I have K9 Ranger at the secondary entrance. He is alone and favoring one front leg. Confirm location of Corporal Owen Blake." Static answered first. Then the duty operator replied. "Stand by." Daniel kept one hand near Ranger's collar without gripping it. The dog's breathing was fast but controlled. His muscles trembled beneath the dust-coated fur. "You walked a long way, did you not?" Ranger looked back toward the hills. The radio clicked again. "Mercer, Blake was listed as cleared from yesterday's Sector 9 exercise at 17:30. No current assignment." Daniel looked at the patch. "Who confirmed he returned?" A pause followed. "The exercise log shows early release from route." "That is not what I asked." Another pause. "No visual confirmation available." Daniel felt the old uneasiness rise beneath his ribs. Years earlier, another training report had been complete on paper and empty where the truth should have been. A friend had never come back, and Daniel had accepted the final wording because everyone above him had signed it. He had learned too late that signatures could close a file without answering a question. Ranger nudged the patch with his nose. Then he took 2 limping steps toward the road and looked back at Daniel. "You did not come here for treatment first," Daniel said. Ranger stood perfectly still. No bark. No whine. Only that fixed stare toward the western training grounds. Daniel picked up the patch using a clean evidence cloth from the gate station. The fabric felt stiff with dried mud. Beneath the surface grime, he caught the faint smell of diesel and wet earth. Sector 9 had an old generator station, several miles beyond the last active range. The access road had been restricted after recent rain. Owen had mentioned it 2 days earlier while checking K9 gear. Said the ground was shifting near the drainage line. Said someone needed to mark it before the next exercise. Daniel had assumed the warning had been filed. Ranger swayed slightly. Daniel steadied him with one hand beneath the harness. "We are getting your paw checked." The dog resisted only by turning his head again toward the hills. "And then we are going back." Ranger's ears lifted. Daniel pressed the radio key. "Operations, notify the veterinary clinic and Captain Hayes. Lock the Sector 9 logs. No one closes this as a handler deviation until we confirm Blake's location." He looked down at the patch in his hand. One dog. One message. No handler. Ranger had not returned to be rescued. He had come back to find the one person he believed would listen. Dr. Emily Carter met Daniel at the veterinary clinic entrance with a wheeled table covered in a clean gray blanket. Ranger stepped forward without being lifted, but his front right paw barely touched the floor. Daniel stayed beside him as Emily guided the German Shepherd into the examination room. The space smelled of antiseptic, warm towels, and coffee that had gone cold before sunrise. Ranger ignored the water bowl placed near the wall. His eyes remained fixed on the patch in Daniel's hand. "He has been moving for hours," Emily said as she checked his breathing and pulse. "Probably several miles." She examined the paw carefully. "The pad is scraped and swollen, but I do not feel a fracture." Daniel looked at Ranger's harness. Dust had worked into every seam. "Can he travel?" "Not yet." Emily cleaned the paw, wrapped it, and checked the rest of his legs. "He needs fluids, rest, and a proper scan before anyone asks more from him." Ranger lifted his head when Daniel set the patch on the metal counter. Emily noticed. "That came back with him?" "Owen's training patch." "The red stain." "Unknown." Emily pulled on gloves and examined the fabric beneath a bright lamp. The stain ran along one edge, dark and dry, but most of the patch was coated with gray mud. She used a swab, then checked Ranger's scraped paw. "The blood is his," she said. "At least most of it." The pattern matches where he held the patch against his mouth while walking. Daniel felt a small measure of relief, but it did not last. "What else do you see?" Emily turned the patch over. Fine silver particles clung to the stitching. The fabric smelled faintly of diesel, damp soil, and old rubber. "Steel dust," she said. "Maybe from a graded floor or maintenance platform." She touched the mud with a clean tool. "This is not the red clay from the active training fields." Daniel leaned closer. Sector 9 had gray drainage soil, an old generator station, and steel access panels that had not been replaced in years. 3 details. 1 location. Ranger pushed himself upright despite the bandage. Emily placed a steady hand against his shoulder. "No." At the sound of Owen's name over Daniel's radio, the dog became still. Captain Laura Hayes entered moments later, wearing a field jacket over her uniform and carrying a folder from operations. "The official log says Corporal Blake left the route at 17:30 after failing to follow the assigned lane," she said. Daniel did not look at the folder. "Who saw him leave?" Hayes opened it. "Chief Warrant Officer Vale signed the closeout." "That is paperwork." "I asked for a witness." Her jaw tightened slightly. "There is no confirmed visual." Ranger gave a low breath and looked toward the door. Daniel pointed to the patch. "Gray drainage mud. Diesel. Steel dust. All 3 matched the old generator station." Hayes studied Emily. "Can you confirm that?" "I can confirm the materials are consistent," Emily said. "Not the location." Daniel looked at Ranger. "He can." Hayes crossed her arms. "He is injured. He is also the only one who came back." The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the overhead light. Hayes opened the folder again. "Vale believes Blake may have left the exercise voluntarily." Ranger stood. His wrapped paw touched the floor for less than a second, but his entire body turned toward the hallway. Daniel stepped beside him. He heard Blake's name. Dogs react to familiar sounds. "Then let us see what he does with one." Daniel removed Owen's patch from the counter and held it near Ranger's nose. The German shepherd smelled it once, then walked past Daniel toward the clinic door. Emily blocked him gently. Ranger changed direction, moved to Daniel's left side, and touched his nose against a pocket on Daniel's field jacket. Inside was the key ring to the K9 equipment lockers. Hayes noticed. "What is he asking for?" "Owen's locker." Daniel clipped the key ring to his belt. Emily finished securing the bandage and handed Daniel a short support lead. "He gets 5 minutes. No running. No stairs." The equipment building stood less than 100 yards away across the base courtyard. Ranger moved slowly but with purpose, guiding them past the kennels and stopping at locker 12. Daniel unlocked it. Inside hung Owen's spare vest, a folded map, and a stack of maintenance reports secured with a rubber band. Ranger pressed his nose against the reports. Daniel removed them. The top page showed a photograph of a cracked drainage channel in Sector 9. Beneath it, Owen had written one sentence in block letters. "Generator access road unsafe after rain. Reported twice." Daniel looked at Hayes. The second story said Owen had abandoned his route. The dog was beginning to tell a different one. Daniel spread the maintenance reports across the steel workbench, while Hayes closed the locker room door behind them. Ranger sat beside Owen's vest, favoring the wrapped paw, but refusing to lie down. The first 2 reports carried Owen's signature. The third had the same photograph of the cracked drainage channel, but the warning section had been shortened. The words radio shadow and unstable access road were gone. In their place, someone had written monitored during future exercises. Daniel ran one finger along the changed line. This was rewritten. Hayes compared the dates. The original was submitted 6 days ago. The revised copy entered the system yesterday morning. Who approved it? She turned the page. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Vale. Ranger pushed his nose beneath the folded map and lifted it from the shelf. It opened across the floor. A red route marked the current exercise lane. A blue pencil line curved west, following the older generator road before disappearing near a drainage basin. Owen had circled a section beneath the station and written, "No radio coverage below grade." Daniel crouched beside the map. If the road shifted, he could have moved off the assigned lane to avoid it. Hayes studied the blue line, or to inspect the damage. Either way, the log calling it a voluntary departure makes no sense. Footsteps approached outside. Vale entered without knocking. He was broad-shouldered, composed, and dressed as though the day had begun exactly as planned. His gaze moved from the open locker to the reports in Daniel's hands. "Captain, I was told Mercer locked the Sector 9 records." "I did," Hayes said, "until Blake's location is confirmed." Vale looked at Ranger. The dog returned. Blake likely separated from him after leaving the route. Daniel held up the original report. Owen warned that the generator access road could fail after rain. A maintenance concern, not an emergency. Then why was the wording changed? Vale's expression remained flat. Because the first language was speculative and would have shut down the entire sector without evidence. Hayes placed the revised report beside the original. There is evidence now. Blake is missing. There is still no proof he entered the restricted road. Ranger stood at the sound of Owen's name and moved toward the map. He lowered his nose to the blue line, followed it to the circled drainage basin, and stopped. Vale glanced down. A dog cannot read a map. "No," Daniel said, "but he knows the smell of where he came from." Ranger turned toward the door and pulled once against the support lead. His breathing quickened. Daniel looked at the patch sealed inside an evidence sleeve, then at the steel dust caught in its stitching. The old generator station had graded maintenance floors. Beneath those floors ran an access corridor built below grade, exactly where the radio shadow began. 3 stories now sat in front of them. The official log said Owen left the route. The reports said the route was unsafe. Ranger said Owen never came back. Hayes reached for her radio. "Operations, prepare a 4-person search element for Sector 9. Medical support, recovery equipment, and AK-9 transport crate." Vale stepped closer. "Captain, the weather front is moving in. Sending a team onto an unstable road based on a dog's reaction is not sound procedure." Hayes did not lower the radio. "We are not sending them based on a reaction. We are sending them based on an unaccounted marine, altered safety reports, physical evidence, and a trained K-9 who returned alone." Vale's voice hardened. "You are risking personnel over a theory." Daniel met his eyes. "We already risked one by ignoring a warning." Silence held between them. Ranger placed his uninjured paw on the edge of the map. Daniel remembered the friend he had lost years earlier and the report he had accepted because every line appeared complete. He had believed a signed document meant someone had asked every question. Now he knew better. Paper could be corrected. Routes could be renamed. Warnings could be reduced to softer language. A dog did not soften anything. Ranger had walked through pain, carrying the patch that identified Owen and the dust that identified the place. Hayes issued the final order. "Sector 9 search is authorized." Emily appeared in the doorway with a compact support harness. "Ranger is not walking the route." Daniel nodded. "He rides until we need direction." She secured the harness around the dog's chest and checked the bandage again. Ranger remained focused on the western exit. Hayes gathered the original reports and placed them in a sealed folder. Vale watched without speaking. Daniel folded the old map along Owen's blue line and slipped it into his field case. Outside, morning light had turned gray. Wind moved dust across the concrete toward the distant hills. Ranger stepped into the transport crate, then looked directly at Daniel. The message had changed. He was no longer asking whether Daniel understood. He was waiting to see whether understanding would become action. The search convoy left the base through the western service gate just after 8 in the morning. 2 utility vehicles carried medical gear, lifting equipment, water, and a portable radio repeater. Ranger rode in a padded crate behind Daniel, his injured paw supported and his eyes fixed through the mesh toward the hills. Captain Hayes drove the lead vehicle. Emily sat beside Ranger, monitoring his breathing and checking the bandage whenever the road turned rough. Vale traveled in the second truck with 2 Marines from the recovery team, saying little as Sector 9 came into view beneath a low gray sky. Recent rain had carved dark lines through the hills. The active training route looked firm from a distance, but the older generator road had been blocked by 3 portable warning barriers placed across the entrance. Daniel stepped out and examined them. Fresh tire marks cut through the mud behind the barriers. Hayes unfolded the current map across the hood. This road is not shown. Daniel opened Owen's older map beside it. It was removed from the updated version. Vale looked toward the weathered track. It was decommissioned. Then why are there fresh marks? Daniel asked. No one answered. Ranger gave a sharp breath from the crate. Emily opened the rear door, but kept him inside. Daniel carried the sealed patch near the mesh. Ranger smelled it, turned his head toward the blocked road, and pressed his nose against the crate door. That is our direction, Daniel said. Hayes ordered the barriers moved. The vehicles advanced only another quarter-mile before the mud became too soft for safe travel. From there, the team continued on foot, using the older blue route on Owen's map. Ranger remained in a low transport cart pulled by 2 Marines, his head raised above the padded sides. The road narrowed between concrete drainage walls. Broken orange cord hung from one post, and a strip of fabric matching Owen's training shirt had caught on the wire. Daniel removed it carefully and placed it in an evidence sleeve. He came through here. Ranger watched the cloth, then looked farther west. The old generator station appeared beyond the next bend, a square concrete building with rusted vents and a low steel roof. One side of the access road had sunk several inches, leaving a deep crack near the drainage channel. Hayes stopped the team. No one crosses until engineering checks the surface. A Marine tested the ground with a probe while Daniel studied the building. The main entrance stood open. Inside, dust covered the floor, but one path had been disturbed recently. Ranger shifted in the cart. Emily placed a hand against his shoulder. Easy. The team crossed one at a time along the stable edge and entered the station. The air smelled of diesel, damp steel, and old insulation. A handheld radio lay near the control panel, its casing cracked but intact. Daniel picked it up. The display was dark. Beside it, a length of torn restraint cord led toward a stairwell descending below the main floor. Hayes called into the lower level. Corporal Blake, this is Captain Hayes. Respond if you can hear me. Only the hollow return of her voice came back. Ranger stood inside the cart despite the support straps. He gave one low whine and fixed his eyes on the stairs. Vale looked at the unstable wall near the stair opening. We should not take the dog down there. Daniel agreed. He stays here. Ranger did not. He turned sharply and stared at a steel maintenance plate set into the floor several feet from the stairwell. Then he struck it once with his uninjured paw. The sound rang through the room. Hollow. He struck it again. Daniel knelt beside the plate. Dust had been cleared from one corner, and fresh scrape marks ran along the edge. Hayes crouched opposite him. Access hatch. Daniel found a recessed handle and pulled. The plate moved less than an inch before stopping. Something beneath it pressed upward against the frame. Ranger scratched a third time. This time, a faint sound answered from below. Not machinery. 3 slow knocks against metal. The entire room went still. Daniel leaned close to the gap. Owen. A weak voice came through the floor. Mercer. Ranger gave a single breath that sounded almost like relief. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second. Owen was alive. Hayes immediately called for the lifting gear. Vale stepped back from the hatch, his face drained of color. The report had said the Marine left the route. The truth had been beneath their feet the entire time. Hayes ordered the room cleared around the hatch while the recovery team brought in a compact lifting frame and 2 steel spreader bars. Daniel stayed beside the opening, one hand resting near the edge where Owen's voice had come through. Ranger remained in the transport cart several feet away, breathing hard but watching every movement. Owen, can you hear me? Daniel called. A pause followed. Then the answer came faintly through the metal. Yes. Are you pinned? No. The door below is blocked. I am in the service room. Daniel looked at Hayes. He is mobile. Good, she said. We lift the hatch, then assess the stairwell. Vale stood near the wall, silent now, his eyes fixed on the equipment. The team secured the lifting frame over the plate and attached the bars to the recessed handle. On Hayes' signal, they applied pressure slowly. The hatch rose half an inch, then stopped against something lodged beneath the frame. A low scrape echoed from below. "Easy," Daniel said. "Do not force it." One Marine shined a light through the gap. "There is a bent support bracket underneath." Hayes turned to the engineering specialist. "Can we cut it safely?" "Yes, but we need to brace the plate first." The next 10 minutes moved with careful precision. No rushing. No unnecessary noise. Steel braces went into place. A battery tool cut through the damaged bracket. The hatch lifted another 6 inches. Cool air rose from the corridor below, carrying the smell of damp concrete and old fuel. Daniel lowered a flashlight through the opening. Owen moved back from the door. Already clear. They raised the plate high enough to reveal a narrow ladder and a landing beneath it. The stairwell door below had been pushed inward by loose earth and a fallen storage rack. Daniel clipped into a safety line and descended with the engineering Marine behind him. The lower corridor was dark except for the beams of their lights. Mud covered part of the floor. The walls absorbed the radio signal, leaving only static. At the far end, a secondary control room door stood open several inches. Daniel pushed carefully. Owen sat inside against the wall beneath an emergency blanket, pale and exhausted but awake. An empty water bottle and 2 protein bar wrappers lay beside him. His left boot had been removed, and his ankle was wrapped with a strip torn from his undershirt. "You took your time," Owen said, his voice weak but steady. Daniel crouched beside him. "Your dog had to explain the situation." At the mention of Ranger, Owen's face changed. "He made it." He walked back to base. Owen closed his eyes briefly. "Good." The medic descended and checked him while Daniel looked around the room. A broken radio unit sat on the floor. Near the doorway, the matching edge of the torn training patch remained attached to Owen's vest. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Owen pointed toward the corridor. "The access road gave way near the drainage line. I moved into the station to get off the surface. Then part of the storage frame shifted and blocked the lower exit. The radio died in the shadow. And Ranger stayed with me through the night." Owen looked toward the ceiling as if he could see the dog above them. "This morning, his paw got worse. I knew he could still move faster than anyone could find us." Daniel picked up the torn edge of the patch. "You gave him this?" Owen nodded. "I needed him to bring back something they would recognize." "Why me?" Owen took a slow breath. "Because you were the only one who asked about the road after I filed the report." The words landed harder than Daniel expected. Years ago, he had failed to ask one more question. This time, a dog had carried that question back to him. Above them, Ranger gave one clear bark. Owen smiled. "That is him." The team placed Owen in a rescue harness and guided him toward the ladder. When his head rose through the hatch, Ranger stood despite the bandaged paw. Emily tried to steady him, but the dog moved forward only 2 steps and stopped. Owen reached out. Ranger pressed his nose into the Marine's hand. No command. No celebration. Just contact. Daniel watched the handler and dog remain still together beneath the gray morning light. The patch had brought them to the station. The dog had brought them to the truth. And neither had asked permission to be believed. The medic secured Owen on the rescue litter while Emily settled Ranger back into the transport cart beside him. The dog kept his head close to the handler's hand, watching every movement with the same focus that had carried him across miles of rough ground. Daniel walked beside the litter as the team moved carefully out of the generator station. Outside, the weather front had reached the western hills. Wind pushed low clouds across the ridge, and the first drops of rain darkened the dust on the old access road. Hayes ordered a slower pace along the stable edge. No one argued. The road had already proven what happened when warnings were treated like inconveniences. At the first turn, Ranger lifted his head and looked toward the broken drainage channel. Owen followed his gaze. "That is where it started," he said. The shoulder collapsed under the rear equipment cart. I moved Ranger clear and tried to report it, but the radio failed below the grade. Daniel looked at the fresh crack running beside the road. "You filed this before the exercise." 3 times. Owen's voice carried no anger now, only exhaustion. The first 2 reports disappeared into review. The third came back with different wording. Vale walked several paces behind them. At that sentence, he stopped. Hayes turned. "Is that true?" Vale looked toward the road instead of Owen. Rain touched the shoulders of his field jacket. The language was adjusted to prevent an unnecessary shutdown. Daniel held the support line steady as the litter crossed a narrow section. "You removed the radio shadow from the report." Vale said nothing. Hayes stepped closer. and the unstable access road. I believe the risk could be managed with barriers. Daniel looked back at the 3 portable barriers near the entrance, all placed beyond the point where the route had already failed. Barriers no one saw until after the exercise. Vale's expression tightened. The schedule had already been approved. Canceling the sector would have delayed certification for 2 units. Owen opened his eyes. So you changed the report. Vale finally looked at him. I changed the wording. I did not cause the ground to shift. Hayes's voice stayed quiet. No. You only made sure the people using the road were not told what it could do. The team reached the vehicles. Emily checked Ranger's paw again before placing the cart beside Owen's litter. The German shepherd relaxed only when he could see his handler. Daniel stood near the open rear door while Hayes sealed the altered reports, the map, the broken radio, and the training patch inside an evidence case. The dark stain along the edge of the fabric had dried, almost black. It no longer looked dramatic. It looked patient, like something that had waited until the right person was willing to read it. The convoy returned to base under steady rain. Owen was taken to the medical clinic, where doctors confirmed dehydration, exhaustion, and a badly strained ankle, but nothing that time and rest could not repair. Ranger remained in the veterinary wing across the courtyard. Emily placed his bed near the glass partition facing Owen's room. When the handler woke, the first thing he saw was the dog sitting on the other side. Owen lifted one hand. Ranger raised his head. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Hayes called Daniel into the operations room. Vale was already there, seated across from an open folder. No one raised a voice. No one needed to. The original reports lay beside the revised versions. The dates matched. The photographs matched. Only the warnings had changed. Hayes placed the patch in the center of the table. This came back before the truth did, she said. Vale stared at it for a long moment. Then he removed his identification badge and set it beside the folder. Daniel felt no satisfaction, only a slow release of something old. Years ago, he had accepted a clean report because he wanted to believe every necessary question had already been asked. This time, he had looked past the paper and followed the signal no one else wanted to trust. Through the window, Ranger remained beside Owen's room, refusing sleep until the handler opened his eyes again. Daniel watched the dog settle at last. The report had finally spoken. It had only needed 4 tired legs to carry it home. By the next morning, rain had cleared the dust from the training yard and left the western hills dark beneath a pale sky. Owen was moved from the clinic bed to a chair near the window, his strained ankle supported and a blanket across his knees. Ranger remained in the veterinary wing only a few yards away, separated by glass and one open doorway. Emily allowed the German shepherd to visit under supervision, but warned everyone that the injured paw still needed rest. Ranger crossed the room slowly and stopped beside Owen. The handler placed one hand along the dog's neck. Neither moved for several seconds. Daniel stood near the wall with the sealed patch case beneath his arm. You gave him a direct command, he said. Owen nodded. Fine, Mercer. Why not return to the gate? Because the gate might have treated him like a loose dog. Owen looked down at Ranger. You knew the Sector 9 reports were wrong. You asked questions when everyone else wanted the exercise closed out. Daniel felt the familiar weight of the old training accident return, but it did not settle as deeply as before. I did not ask enough last time. Owen understood without asking for details. You did this time. Ranger shifted closer to the chair and rested his chin against Owen's leg. Daniel placed the case on a nearby table and removed the patch. Cleaned of loose mud, it still carried a torn edge and dark stain. Owen picked it up carefully. I thought I would never see this again. He would not let it go. He does that. Owen ran his thumb over the faded insignia. Once Ranger accepts a task, he does not decide it is too hard halfway home. Daniel looked through the window towards Sector 9. A temporary closure notice had already been posted. Engineering teams were inspecting the drainage road, the radio shadow, and every access panel beneath the old station. Captain Hayes had ordered a full review of the altered safety reports. Vale had been relieved of his duties pending the investigation. The changes were quiet, but they were real. No ceremony, no speech, just new barriers, signed work orders, and warnings returned to the places where they belonged. Hayes entered carrying a fresh folder and a small black case. The commanding officer approved a revised reporting process, she said. Any unresolved safety concern now remains visible in the system until the person who filed it confirms the correction. Owen gave a tired smile. That would have helped. It will help the next person. She opened the black case. Inside was a replacement training patch, clean and bright. The original can be archived with the investigation. Owen looked at the new patch, then at the worn one in his hand. No, Hayes waited. Owen unclipped a narrow strap from Ranger's working harness and threaded the old patch through it. The fabric sat against the dog's chest, torn edge visible. This one stays with him. Ranger looked down briefly, then back at Owen. Daniel almost smiled. He carried it farther than anyone expected. Then he earned it. Emily entered and checked Ranger's bandage. 5 more minutes. Owen nodded. Understood. The word came naturally, carrying none of the resistance it might have the day before. Daniel walked with Hayes into the corridor. Through the glass, Ranger remained beside Owen, the patch resting against his harness. What happens to Vale? Daniel asked. That is for the investigation. And the report? Hayes held up the folder. This one includes every version. Daniel looked at the pages. Original warnings. Revised language. Timestamps. Photographs. No softened phrasing. No missing lines. The truth did not look dramatic when printed correctly. It looked ordinary. That was what made the earlier silence feel worse. At noon, a maintenance convoy left for Sector 9 carrying new drainage markers, signal repeaters, and steel supports. Daniel watched from the clinic steps as the vehicles passed the western gate. Ranger heard the engines and lifted his head, but he did not rise. Owen was awake. The road was closed. The warning had been heard. For the first time since returning to base, the dog allowed his eyes to close. Daniel stood beneath the clearing sky and understood that loyalty was not only the refusal to leave someone behind. Sometimes it was the refusal to let the truth stay buried after everyone came home. 3 weeks later, Sector 9 no longer looked forgotten. Fresh barriers stood at the entrance to the old access road, bright against the dry California hills. New drainage supports lined the shoulder, and a radio repeater rose above the generator station where the signal had once disappeared below grade. Daniel arrived before sunrise with Captain Hayes and the first safety inspection team. The air smelled of dust, new steel, and morning sagebrush. Every warning sign was visible. Every repair order carried a name, a date, and confirmation from the Marine who had first reported the problem. Owen came later in a utility vehicle, his ankle supported by a light brace. Ranger rode beside him, the bandage gone from his front paw, but his pace still measured. The old training patch remained attached to his working harness. Its torn edge moved slightly in the wind. Daniel watched the German shepherd step onto the repaired road and pause. Ranger smelled the ground, looked toward the station, then returned to Owen's side without hesitation. He remembers, Owen said. So do I. Hayes handed Owen a tablet containing the new route plan. Nothing begins until you approve the safety corrections. Owen scrolled through each item carefully. Drainage channel reinforced. Below-grade radio coverage restored. Access panels replaced. Emergency beacon installed inside the service corridor. He stopped at the final line. Original reporting officer verification required. Owen looked at Daniel. They kept that part. They should have kept it the first time. Owen signed. The inspection team moved forward, checking the road one section at a time. Daniel did not lead from the front. He walked beside Ranger, letting the dog set an easy pace while Owen tested the restored radio signal at every marked point. At the entrance to the generator station, Ranger slowed. His amber eyes settled on the steel maintenance hatch. The plate had been replaced and painted safety yellow, with a release handle accessible from both sides. Owen knelt beside him. Not going down there today. Ranger touched his nose to the handler's hand. Then he looked at Daniel. The moment was brief, but Daniel understood it. The dog was not asking for help now. He was confirming that the message had been received. Inside the station, the new repeater carried Owen's voice clearly from the lower corridor. No static. No broken words. Hayes stood near the control panel, listening as each level checked in. Signal is strong throughout, Owen reported. Copy, Daniel answered. The simple reply moved through him more deeply than he expected. Years earlier, another voice had vanished behind an incomplete report, and Daniel had accepted the silence because he believed procedure had done all it could. This time, the silence had been challenged. Not by rank, not by paperwork, by a tired German shepherd who refused to return without an answer. When the inspection ended, the team gathered outside beneath the growing sun. Hayes posted the approved route notice on the new board. The old version, with the missing road and softened warnings, had already been removed from every active file. Owen stood beside Ranger while Daniel checked the final barrier lock. "You planning to stay in safety operations?" Owen asked. Daniel looked toward the western hills. "I thought I was only filling a gap." Maybe that was the old plan. Ranger stepped closer and leaned lightly against Daniel's leg. Owen smiled. "He seems to think you belong." Daniel rested one hand against the dog's shoulder. "He has been right before." Hayes approached with a folded assignment letter. The command had approved Daniel to lead a new field review team, pairing experienced Marines with working dog units during high-risk exercises. The position was not a reward. It was responsibility made visible. Daniel accepted the letter. "When do we start?" "Monday." He nodded. No hesitation. At the edge of the road, Ranger lowered himself beside Owen and watched the inspection team remove the last temporary marker. The repaired route stretched ahead, clearly marked and open only where it was safe. Daniel looked at the patch on the dog's harness. It was still stained, still torn, still carrying the shape of everything the official record had tried to leave out. Yet now it rested in plain sight, not as evidence of failure, but as proof that someone had listened before it was too late. Monday morning began with a thin marine layer over the western hills and the sound of kennel doors opening across the training yard. Daniel arrived before the first formation, carrying the new field review binder under one arm. His name had been added to the office door beside safety operations, but the room still looked temporary. One desk, two folding chairs, a wall map of every active training sector. Owen entered a few minutes later with Ranger at his left side. The German shepherd walked evenly now, his recovered paw touching the concrete without hesitation. The torn patch remained secured to the front of his harness. Daniel looked at it, then at Owen. "Ready?" Owen nodded. He has been ready since 5. Ranger sat at the sound of his handler's voice, eyes alert, ears forward. Their first assignment was not dramatic. No missing Marine, no damaged road, just a routine review of a navigation exercise planned beyond the southern ridge. Daniel checked the route with the instructors, inspected the emergency beacons, and asked each team leader to identify the nearest radio dead zone. Some answered immediately. Others had to look. He made them look again. At the final briefing, one young corporal raised a hand. "Staff Sergeant, the map shows the creek crossing is open, but yesterday's rain cut a new channel along the east bank." The room grew quiet. A small concern. Easy to postpone. Easy to soften. Daniel closed the binder. "Show me." They drove out together. The crossing was not dangerous yet, but the soil had begun to pull away beneath the marker posts. Daniel canceled that section of the route, ordered a temporary detour, and asked the corporal to remain while the correction was entered into the system. "You signed the verification," Daniel said. The corporal looked surprised. "Me? You found it. You confirm when it is fixed." Owen stood nearby with Ranger. The dog watched Daniel, then lowered himself in the shade beside the vehicle. No urgency, no unanswered signal, just a working dog beside the handler who had come home. By noon, the revised route was posted, the warning remained visible in the system, and the first exercise began without using the unstable crossing. Hayes arrived during the final inspection and looked over the changes. "You closed half a mile for 6 inches of erosion." Daniel nodded. 6 inches becomes more when no one owns the report. She read the corporal's signed note and returned the tablet. "Good." At the end of the day, Daniel walked with Owen and Ranger toward the western gate. The same security lights had begun to glow where the dog had appeared alone weeks earlier. Trucks moved through the checkpoint. Wind carried the smell of warm asphalt and dry grass. Ranger stopped at the place where he had dropped the patch. Daniel saw the memory pass through Owen's face. The handler rested one hand on the dog's neck. "This is where you found him. This is where he found me." Owen looked at Daniel. "I never thanked you." Daniel shook his head. "He made the trip. I just followed the evidence." Ranger looked between them, then sat. Owen removed the patch from the harness and held it out. "Command wants to display it in the safety office." Daniel studied the worn fabric. The stain had faded. The torn edge had been reinforced with clear stitching, but no one had tried to make it look new. "What do you want?" Daniel asked. Owen looked down at Ranger. I think it should stay where people have to see it. Together, they carried the patch back to Daniel's office. He mounted it beneath the wall map inside a simple wooden frame. No polished plaque. No list of names. Only the fabric and one line typed beneath it. Listen before the silence becomes official. Ranger stood in front of the frame, nose lifted briefly toward the familiar scent. Then he turned away and rested beside Owen's chair. Outside, the base continued its ordinary rhythm. Engine started. Radios checked in. Gates opened and closed. Nothing about the evening looked like a miracle. That was the point. The road had been repaired. The warnings remained visible. A Marine had returned to duty. A dog had returned to his handler. And Daniel had returned to the part of himself that still knew a question was worth asking, even when every form said the answer was complete. Before leaving, he switched off the office light. The patch remained visible in the glow from the hallway. Torn. Stained. Impossible to ignore. Some truths arrived in reports. Others walked home on 4 tired legs and waited at the gate until someone chose to listen.